13:47 hours, North Atlantic 47-23 N1941W. Captain Heinrich Vogel stood atop the conning tower of U-537, scanning the empty sea through binoculars crusted with salt. Around him, 7 other U-boats cruised together on the surface, their close daylight formation breaking every hard-learned rule of submarine warfare forged in 4 years of the Atlantic campaign. Within the next 15 minutes, all 8 submarines would vanish, not sunk by destroyers or corvettes, but by aircraft that had no business being this far out over the ocean. The Americans called them Liberators, and on that spring afternoon, they would prove worthy of the name, unleashing the most destructive 15 minutes of anti-submarine warfare the Kriegsmarine had ever faced. The disaster that struck in the middle of the Atlantic on May 12, 1943, had its origins 6 weeks earlier, deep within the reinforced concrete pens of Lorient, France. There, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, had gathered his top U-boat captains for an urgent meeting. The discussion centered on a growing crisis. Allied air power was crippling the once-feared Wolfpack strategy that had brought Germany close to victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. Captain Heinrich Vogel, leader of the 9th U-boat flotilla, put forward an unorthodox idea later, recorded in naval archives. His study of Allied reconnaissance routes had uncovered what appeared to be a blind spot, an area roughly 600 to 800 nautical miles off the coast of Newfoundland, where aircraft patrols, in theory, could not reach. The consolidated B-24 WWII Liberator was officially rated for a range of about 100 miles. But when carrying a full bomb load and accounting for patrol duration, its operational reach was effectively limited to roughly 600 miles from its coastal airfields. Vogel's proposal was built on careful calculation. By assembling a surface group of 8 U-boats within the so-called mid-Atlantic gap, the flotilla could maintain speeds near 17 knots, around 3 times faster than their usual submerged pace of 5 to 6 knots. This formation, he argued, would allow them to complete an Atlantic crossing in just 5 days, rather than the usual 15 required when traveling underwater and alone. The operational mathematics appeared flawless. The gap zone measured 400 nautical miles wide. Allied patrol aircraft would need 8 hours of flight time just to reach the zone's edge, leaving minimal loiter time for patrol operations. Bedu the Felshopper Deer Unzum U-Boat Command approved Operation Sea Teufel Sea Devil on April 3, 1943. 8 Type 9 Q-boats were selected for their extended range capabilities. According to Kriegsmarine records, these boats displaced 11 20-ton surfaced, carried 22 torpedoes, and mounted 37 mm and 20 mm anti-aircraft guns. The boats selected were U-537, U-441, U-46, U-448, U-552, U-558, and U-564. The intelligence failure was absolute. What German naval intelligence did not know, could not have known, was that British scientists at the telecommunications research establishment had solved the Liberators' range problem. Technical modifications documented in RAF Coastal Command records showed how removing armor plating, installing auxiliary fuel tanks in the bomb bay, and optimizing cruise altitude extended the B-24's operational radius to 850 nautical miles. The Americans had been operating these very long-range Liberators from Newfoundland since March 1943, closing the mid-Atlantic gap that Vogel's calculations depended upon. Signals. Intelligence from Bletchley Park had been tracking German preparations for Operation Sea. TUFL since April 15th. RAF Coastal Command and U.S. Navy Anti-Submarine Command knew the U-boat were coming. May 11, 1943, 200 hours. The 8 U-boat render viewed 150 mi southwest of Iceland. Vogel's operational order captured from wreckage, after the war specified formation, sailing 2 columns of 4 boats, 500-meter, spacing, zigzag pattern. Every 20 minutes, continuous air watch from all vessels. The formation, submerged during dawn twilight, surfaced at 800 hours and began their dash across what they believed was the safe zone. They were already being watched. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington of the U.S. Navy's VP-84 squadron had been airborne from Argentia, Newfoundland since 05:30 hours on May 12, 1943. His B-34D Liberator, nicknamed Atlantic Reaper, carried modifications that represented the cutting edge of anti-submarine warfare technology. The aircraft's normal crew of 10 had been reduced to 8 to save weight. Every available space contained fuel tanks. The standard bomb load had been replaced with 8 depth charges and 8 500 GLB general purpose bombs fitted with hydrostatic fuses. The Liberators' ASV Mark T-3 radar, operating on 10 cm wavelength, could detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 12 m in optimal conditions. The equipment developed by British scientists and manufactured in America had been operational for only 6 weeks. German naval intelligence had no knowledge of its existence. The U-boat running on the surface below had no idea they were radiating a radar signature as clear as a lighthouse beam. At 13:32 hours, the radar operator, Petty Officer, 2nd Class Robert Kellerman, detected multiple contacts bearing 047 breeze, range 18 miles. The radar return showed 8 distinct targets in formation. Harrington's after-action report, preserved in National Archives records, describes his immediate assessment. 8 surface contacts in military formation. Spacing and movement consistent with U-boat Wolfpack proceeded to attack altitude. The tactical situation favored the attackers completely. The Liberator approached from the southeast with the sun behind them, making visual detection difficult. The U-boat focused on watching the northern and western horizons, where they expected threats to originate, maintained their eastward course at 17 knots. The formation's anti-aircraft capability, while theoretically formidable with 64 total gun barrels across 8 boats, depended on early warning to man battle stations. Harrington descended to 200 ft approaching at 210 knots. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Brennan, armed all 16 weapons. The bombarder, Ensign David Walsh, crouched in the nose position with the Norden bomb sight aligned. The nose gunner manned twin 50 caliber machine guns. The tactical plan was brutal in its simplicity. A straight strafing run down the length of the formation, releasing weapons sequentially at 3-second intervals. At 13:45 hours, lookouts on U-552, the rear boat in the western column, spotted the Liberator. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Forrester, commanding U-552, transmitted the warning: aircraft bearing 135, altitude low, closing fast. The radio message intercepted by Allied listening stations would be U-552's last transmission. 7 U-boat commanders simultaneously recognized their nightmare scenario. Caught on the surface by a Fungin bomber, with nowhere to run. Emergency dive procedures required 30 to 35 seconds from alarm to submergence. The Liberator was 40 seconds away. The anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their weapons, but coordination was impossible. Each U-boat captain faced an immediate tactical decision: dive and become a stationary target, or remain surfaced and fight with hastily manned guns. Vogel in U-537 at the formation's head made the decision that sealed their fate. He ordered all boats to remain surfaced and engage. It was the last order he would ever give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 13:47 hours and 12 seconds. The Liberators' nose guns opened fire at 800 WWII. Tracer rounds. 1 in every 5 bullets, phosphorus tipped for visibility. Streak toward the lead U-boat in brilliant lines that appeared almost leisurely in their flight. The 50 caliber rounds, each weighing over 1.70 and traveling at 2900 ft per second, reached U-537's conning tower in 1.2 seconds. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Cupertine Circe Vogel, still standing in the conning tower with binoculars raised, was struck by 3 rounds simultaneously. The armor, piercing incendiary bullets, tore through the thin steel plating of the conning tower as if it were paper. 4 other crew members on the bridge died in the first 2 seconds of the attack. The lookout attempting to reach the 37 Numenebized gun never made it. His body fell backward into the open hatch, blocking the emergency dive procedure. The Liberator's bombardier released the first depth charge at 13:47 hours and 18 seconds. The 65 Elb Mark 44 depth charge set for shallow detonation at 25 ft fell away from the bomb bay. It struck the water 40 ft ahead of U-537's bow. The hydrostatic fuse triggered at precisely 25 ft depth, 300 Eld of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT. It detonated in a massive underwater explosion that created a pressure wave traveling at 5,000 ft per second through the incompressible medium of seawater. U-537's bow lifted completely out of the water from the force of the underwater detonation. The pressure hull designed to withstand gradual compression at depth could not survive the instantaneous shock wave from close proximity explosion. Rivets sheared along the forward compartment seams. Seawater flooded into their torpedo room at tremendous pressure. The boat's forward momentum drove the damaged bow downward. Within 8 seconds of the depth charge detonation, U-537's bow pointed at a 45° angle toward the ocean floor, 2,400 ft below. The Liberator continued its strafing run at 200 ft altitude, 210 knots air speed. 3 seconds after the first depth charge release, the second weapon fell toward U-541. Captain Lieutenant Vera Hartmann had managed to get his boat into a crash dive. The conning tower hatch was sealed. The diving planes were set to maximum down angle. The boat had achieved approximately 15 ft of depth when the depth charge exploded 30 ft from the stern. The explosion occurred at the worst possible moment in the dive sequence. The stern was still near the surface, while the bow had descended to 25 ft, presenting maximum surface area to the pressure wave. The force of the blast crushed the after torpedo room and ruptured fuel tanks. Diesel fuel mixing with seawater created a massive slick on the surface. The submarine's stern rose at an impossible angle, almost vertical, as flooding forward compartments dragged the bow downward. 47 men died in the lightless interior as their boat became their tomb. U-105 and 43, commanded by Oberleutnant Circe Hans-Jürgenhofer, attempted to fight back. The 37 WWII gun crew had reached their weapon and opened fire. The anti-aircraft gun, capable of firing 80 rounds per minute, sent shells toward the Liberator in desperation. 3 rounds struck the bomber's port wing, punching holes through aluminum skin, but missing critical systems. The return fire from the Liberator's waist guns killed 4 of the 5-man gun crew. Instantly, the third depth charge fell at 13:47 hours and 24 seconds. It detonated directly beneath U-543's pressure hull amidships, the most vulnerable point. The explosion lifted the entire 1120-ton submarine clear of the water. Crew members below decks were thrown against bulkheads with bone-crushing force. The pressure hull cracked along its length with the sound like a cannon shot. U-543 broke in half. Both sections sank in less than 20 seconds, taking all 52 crew members down, with air still in their lungs and terror in their hearts. 12 seconds had elapsed since the attack began. 5 U-boat remained, and the Liberators still had 13 weapons aboard. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The tactical timeline, reconstructed from Liberator, crew, debriefing reports, and recovered German log fragments, reveals the mechanical precision of the destruction. At 13:47 hours and 30 seconds, 18 seconds into the attack, U-546 attempted what would prove to be the formation's only successful emergency dive. Corvette and Captain Paul Dietrich had recognized the hopelessness of surface combat. The instant U-537's conning tower exploded under machine gun fire. His crew executed the crash dive procedure flawlessly. The conning tower hatch slammed shut. Vents opened. Main ballast tanks flooded. The bow planes angled to maximum down deflection. The submarine achieved 30 ft of depth when the 4th depth charge detonated 50 ft from the hull. At that depth, the pressure hull could withstand the shock wave. The boat shuddered violently. Light bulbs shattered throughout the interior. Crew members were thrown against equipment, but the hull held. Dietrich ordered the boat to 200 ft and emergency speed. U-546 escaped, damaged but operational. Of the 8 U-boat in Operation ZTO, it would be the only survivor. The 48 men owed their lives to Dietrich's instant decision to dive rather than fight. But survival meant leaving 7 sister boats to their fate. A choice that would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. The Liberator's bomb run continued with devastating efficiency. U-548, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Erich, caught fire after the 5th depth charge detonation ruptured diesel fuel lines. The explosion occurred at 13:47 hours and 36 seconds. Burning fuel spread across the water faster than men could swim. 23 crew members abandoned ship. 18 died in the flames. 5 survivors pulled from the water 3 hours later by a Canadian corvette bore burn injuries, so severe that 2 died during evacuation to Newfoundland. U-552, the boat whose lookouts had first spotted the Liberator, faced the 6th weapon at 13:47 hours and 42 seconds. Captain Lieutenant Clauster had kept his boat on the surface, attempting to bring multiple anti-aircraft weapons to bear. The 20 mm guns rattled out hundreds of rounds, The 3700's gun fired methodically. Not a single round struck the Liberator in a vital area. The return fire from the bombers' multiple gun positions killed or wounded every man on deck. The depth charge that killed U-552 exploded directly beneath the control room. The blast ruptured the pressure hull. In multiple locations simultaneously, the submarine sank bow first at an angle approaching 60 degrees. Seawater flooded through the damaged hull at such pressure that men in forward compartments were crushed against bulkheads by the force of incoming water. The entire boat disappeared beneath the surface in 14 seconds. No survivors. At 13:47 hours and 48 seconds, 36 seconds into the attack, U-558 took the 7th depth charge. Captain Lieutenant Gunn had attempted a surface run to escape the attack zone, pushing the diesel engines to emergency power 18 knots in a desperate sprint. The depth charge fell short of the submarine, but detonated shallow. The pressure wave struck the stern at an oblique angle, jamming the rudder hard to starboard and destroying the port propeller shaft. U-558 began a death spiral, turning in tight circles at high speed with no ability to steer or dive. The crew abandoned the stern compartments as water flooded through the damaged shaft seal. Crack, recognizing his boat was doomed, ordered abandoned ship. 36 men jumped into the Atlantic. The submarine continued its circular course for another 2 minutes before flooding pulled it under. 29 of the 36 survivors were later recovered by Allied ships. The remaining 7 died from hypothermia in 44 degrees Re water before rescue arrived. 1 minute had elapsed since the Liberator opened fire. 7 U-boat were destroyed or crippled. 1 remained U-564, commanded by Oberleutnant Sir Reinhard Zuron, the formation's youngest commander at 26 years old. He had 9 weapons remaining to face. He had perhaps 20 seconds to live. Oberleutnant Sir Z. Reinhardt Zuron had one advantage his 7 sister boats had not possessed. Time to observe and learn. 60 seconds of watching U-boat die had taught him that staying on the surface meant certain death. But diving made a submarine a stationary target for the Liberator's remaining weapons. He chose a third option that regulations did not permit and doctrine did not anticipate. He would fight and dive simultaneously at 13:47 hours and 54 seconds as the Liberator completed its run past the burning hulk of U-558. Zuron gave a series of orders that would be preserved in testimony from the boat's survivors. All hands to diving stations, prepare to crash dive. Flat crews remain at stations and fire until water reaches the guns. Engine room maintain full power until I order dive. It was tactically insane. It was also U-564's only chance. The 37 WM and 20 Nemlin gun crews opened fire as the Liberator banked for its second attack run. The anti-aircraft fire. More accurate now that gunners had observed the aircraft's attack profile, stitched holes across the Liberator's fuselage. 137 Dynams shell struck the starboard waist gun position, killing Seaman First Class Daniel O. Connor instantly and wounding the port waist gunner. Another round penetrated the radio compartment, destroying communication equipment, but miraculously missing the radio operator. Lieutenant Commander Harrington felt the aircraft shudder under the impacts. His after-action report, typed on blood-spotted paper, described the moment clinically. Aircraft sustained multiple hits from target's anti-aircraft fire. Crew casualties reported made decision to press attack despite damage. Target presented threat to Allied shipping if allowed to escape. The Liberator lined up for its second run at 13:48 hours and 10 seconds. Harrington approached from a different angle, coming in lower, 150 FD and faster. U-564's anti-aircraft crews tracked the aircraft with increasing desperation. Submarine, watching from the bridge, waited until the Liberator was at 600 YD before giving the order, emergency dive. All guns, cease fire and clear the deck. The gun crews abandoned their weapons and dove for the conning tower hatch. Submarine was the last man on the bridge. He slammed the hatch shut as water already flowed across the forward deck. O-564 began its dive at 13:48 hours and 18 seconds. The Liberator was 400 wide away and closing at 220 knots. The release point for the 8th depth charge would be in approximately 6 seconds. But the Liberator crew faced an unexpected tactical problem. U-564 was diving, but not in a standard emergency dive profile. The submarine maintained forward momentum, creating a moving target below the surface. The bombardier, Ensign Walsh, had to calculate not where the U-boat was, but where it would be when the depth charge reached detonation depth. He had perhaps 3 seconds to solve a 3-dimensional trigonometry problem. While wounded men screamed in the aircraft behind him, Walsh released at 13:48 hours and 22 seconds. The depth charge fell free, tumbling through 150 ft of air before striking the ocean surface directly above U-558 stern. The submarine had reached 40 ft of depth. The hydrostatic fuse was set for 25 ft. The weapon descended past the pressure hall without detonating. It exploded at 25 ft depth, but 80 ft behind the submarine stern. The pressure wave, attenuated by distance and the water itself, struck the submarine with enough force to crack deck, plating and blow out internal light bulbs, but not enough to rupture the pressure hull. U-564 descended to 250 ft, leveled off, and continued eastward at slow speed. Submarine, standing in the control room, with blood running from a cut on his forehead, knew he had just experienced the luckiest moment of his life. Above, the Liberator circled the wreckage field, searching for the submarine that had escaped. 8 depth charges remained, but U-564 had disappeared into the Atlantic depths, and the Liberator's fuel gauges showed time to return to base. At 13:48 hours and 45 seconds, the attack ended. Elapsed time 1 minute 33 seconds. U-boat destroyed 7. Survivors in the water 68. Kriegsmarine losses 382 men dead or missing. The Liberator Atlantic Reaper turned northwest at 13:49 hours, climbing to 1000 for the 8-hour flight back to Argentia. Lieutenant Commander Harrington's fuel gauges showed 900 gallons remaining, enough for the return flight with minimal reserve. The crew treated their wounded and counted their damage. 23 holes in the fuselage, 1 man dead, 2 wounded. The starboard waist gun destroyed. Radio communications inoperative. For this price they had destroyed 7 U-boat and scattered 68 German submariners into the North Atlantic. Below the survivors of Operation Sea, Teufel struggled in 44 brazened water. Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Ulrich, blown overboard from U-548, clung to a wooden ammunition crate with 3 other men. His watch, still functioning despite immersion in seawater, showed 13:55 hours. The attack that had destroyed his world had lasted less than 2 minutes. He watched the Liberator disappear into the northwest sky. A new rescue would not come from that direction. The Canadian corvette HMCS Drumheller, operating as part of Escort Group C2, received the coded transmission from Argentia at 14:42 hours. The message, forwarded through naval intelligence channels, provided precise coordinates and described multiple U-boat sinkings with survivors in the water. Commander Anthony Griffin, commanding Drumheller, immediately altered course to maximum speed, 16 knots, toward the position 180 mi northeast of his patrol station. The corvette arrived at the coordinates at 18:20 hours, 4 and 122 hours after the attack. Sunlight slanted low across the Atlantic, illuminating an apocalyptic scene. Oil slick stretched across square miles of ocean. Debris fields marked where submarines had gone down. Wooden planking, life vests, personal effects and bodies, some moving, most not, floated in the wreckage. Griffin's after-action report, preserved in Canadian naval archives, described what his crew found with clinical precision, but underlying horror. The water temperature of 44 degrees F gave unprotected swimmers approximately 90 minutes before hypothermia induced unconsciousness. 4 and 1+2 hours had elapsed. Of the 68 German submariners who had entered the water, Drumheller's crew recovered 42 survivors. 31 were pulled aboard alive. 11 were dead from hypothermia, still wearing life vests that had kept their bodies afloat after death. 26 bodies were never recovered, lost to the Atlantic depths that had claimed their submarines. The survivors suffering from hypothermia, shock, and in several cases, severe burns were brought to Drumheller's sick bay and cramped crew quarters. Canadian sailors, who hours earlier would have gladly killed these men, now worked desperately to save them. Hot coffee, blankets, warm clothing, medical attention. The transformation from enemies to humans requiring aid occurred with remarkable speed. Griffin noted in his report that German and Canadian sailors, unable to communicate through language, nevertheless understood each other perfectly through the universal recognition of suffering. Captain Lloyd Nod Friedrich Ulrich, the senior surviving officer present, formally surrendered to Commander Griffin at 19:45 hours. The traditional ceremony of sword surrender could not occur. Ulrich had lost everything but his life vest in the water. Instead, he gave his name, rank, and serial number, acknowledged his status as prisoner of war, and requested that the names of the dead be recorded. Griffin granted the request. The list written in Ulrich's shaking hand on Drumheller's official stationery preserved the names of 382 Kriegs Marine submariners who died on May 12, 1943. The corvette turned southwest toward Halifax, arriving May 15 at 0800 hours. The survivors were transferred to prisoner of war facilities. The dead, sewn into canvas shrouds weighted with fire bars, had been committed to the Atlantic depths with full military honors during the return voyage. But Griffin insisted on this dignity, over protests from some crew members who questioned giving honor to enemy dead. They were submariners. They died at sea. The sea is their proper grave. The intelligence analysis began before Drumheller docked in Halifax. Naval intelligence officers boarded the corvette and began interrogating survivors while medical personnel still work to stabilize the severely hypothermic. The prisoners, exhausted and traumatized, provided information that fundamentally altered Allied understanding of German submarine operations. The existence of Operation SEO. The deliberate formation sailing of 8 U-boat across what Germany believed was the mid-Atlantic air gap revealed critical flaws in marine intelligence assessment. The interrogation reports, declassified in 1973, showed that German Naval Command had no knowledge of very long-range Liberator modifications. They did not know about ASV Mark II radar. They had not anticipated coordinated air patrols guided by signals intelligence. The 15-minute destruction of 7 U-boat resulted not from tactical errors by individual commanders, but from systemic intelligence failure at the highest levels of German naval command. Gross Admiral Karl Donitz received the report of Operation SEAL's destruction on May 14, 1943 at BDU headquarters in Berlin. The loss of 7 U-boat in a single action represented the worst single-day submarine loss of the entire war to that point. The psychological impact exceeded the material loss. If mid-Atlantic formation sailing was impossible, if Allied aircraft could reach positions previously considered safe, if radar could detect surfaced submarines beyond visual range, then the entire strategic foundation of Wolfpack tactics had collapsed. BDU. Operational orders issued May 16, 1943, marked a fundamental shift in U-boat doctrine. All formation sailing in daylight hours was prohibited. Submarines were ordered to transit individually, fully submerged during daylight, surfacing only for battery charging in darkness. The aggressive Wolfpack tactics that had nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline were abandoned in favor of defensive evasion. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached its turning point, and 15 minutes over the mid-Atlantic had accelerated Germany's defeat at sea. The sole surviving U-boat from Operation Seattle, U-546, continued operations until April 24, 1945, when it was sunk by destroyer escort USS Flowery in the final weeks of the European War. Captain Malignant Paul Dietrich died with his boat. Of the crew that had survived May 12, 1943, only 16 lived to surrender. They carried survivors' guilt for having escaped, while 382 comrades died. A burden documented in post-war psychiatric studies of U-boat veterans. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington received the Navy Cross for the action on May 12, 1943. His citation noted that his aggressive attack, despite heavy anti-aircraft fire and at great risk to his aircraft and crew, resulted in the destruction of 7 enemy submarines and the removal of a major threat to Allied shipping. He flew 37 more combat missions before rotating stateside in November 1943. He survived the war and died in 1987 at age 72, never speaking publicly about the 15 minutes that killed 382 men. The 31 German survivors spent the remainder of the war in Canadian and American prisoner of war camps. Under Geneva Convention protocols, they could not be required to perform military labor, but many volunteered for agricultural work in Canadian farms facing labor shortages. Post-war testimony from these survivors revealed that witnessing Canadian treatment of prisoners, humane, respectful within international law, fundamentally altered their understanding of the enemies they had fought. Kapitän-Leutnant Frederick Ulrich, senior survivor of U-548, returned to Germany in 1947 and became a merchant marine officer. In 1963, he attended the christening of HMCS Marga, successor to HMCS Dromhella, as an honored guest. His speech at the ceremony preserved in Canadian Naval archives acknowledged that Commander Griffin and his crew showed us the honor that warriors can extend to defeated enemies, saving our lives and treating us with dignity when we had no right to expect anything but the depth that claimed our comrades. The 15 minutes over the North Atlantic on May 12, 1943, demonstrated what industrial capacity, technological innovation, and tactical courage could achieve against an enemy that had dominated submarine warfare for 4 years. The Liberator that should have been able to reach that far into the Atlantic. The radar that Germany intelligence did not know existed. The depth charges that arrived with precision despite anti-aircraft fire. The combination proved unstoppable. Today, the coordinates 47 degrees 23 minutes north, 19 degrees 41 minutes west mark no memorial. The Atlantic reveals nothing of what occurred there. 7 U-boat rest on the ocean floor, 200-400 feet down in darkness and cold. The 351 men who died where boats remain at their posts, eternal submariners in steel tombs. The mathematics of war reduced them to statistics. 7 boats destroyed, 382 casualties, 15 minutes of combat. But each number represented a man who kissed his family goodbye, boarded a submarine, believing his defensive calculations were correct, and learned too late that technology had rendered courage irrelevant. The survivors, German and Allied alike, carried different memories of that afternoon. The Germans remembered the terror of watching their world explode around them, the cold Atlantic claiming comrades, and the unexpected mercy of enemies who saved them. The crew of the Liberator later recalled the cold precision with which they carried out their orders, the flak that ripped through their plane, and the grim awareness that every depth charge they dropped ended the lives of men trapped with no hope of survival. In war, people become parts of vast industrial machines, where personal bravery is outweighed by the dominance of technology. The brief 15 minutes over the North Atlantic made this reality painfully clear. The courageous submariners who perished aboard their U-boats that day did not fall for lack of bravery or skill, but because they faced an enemy equipped with superior technology. Their sacrifice gained Germany nothing beyond a temporary reprieve. Their loss underscored a harsh lesson of modern warfare. Triumph goes not to the fearless, but to those who possess the more advanced machines, sharper intelligence, and stronger supply lines. The final survivor of that battle, a German machinist's mate rescued from the sea by Drumheller's crew, passed away in 2003 at the age of 81. With his passing, the last living account of those 15 fateful minutes that reshaped submarine warfare was lost. What endures are the records, the photographs, and the vast Atlantic itself, still guarding its secrets beneath the waves. 7 submarines and 351 sailors remain entombed below, silent witnesses to the moment when human bravery was overtaken by advancing technology and industrial might crushed tactical ingenuity. If you found this story compelling, there are 2 more remarkable tales waiting for you right on your screen. Don't miss out. Click to explore them. And remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss our latest updates.